Hey everyone, it's me, Gavin, and we're back with another episode of this fucking bullshit that I do. So firstly, one of the things I wanted to address was in the first episode, or the second, whichever one it was, but whichever episode I talked about Danganronpa, I got asked if I was ever going to cover, like, Danganronpa proper, as, you know, as in, like, an actual thing like I did for the other series, and not just, like, a short blurb at the end of the Ace Attorney section. And the answer to that is probably not, because this whole series, beyond these first few episodes, are going to be whatever I played in that week, and unless I ever replay Danganronpa, I'm probably never going to talk about the series, aside from that short little blurb I gave, because, like I said there, I don't really want to spoil Danganronpa for anybody, and I'm still kind of deciding whether I want this series to be for people who already know the games that I'm talking about, or for them to be introductions to the games that I'm talking about, but either way, even at risk of spoiling Danganronpa for someone, I just don't want to have that be a thing that I went over in that episode. In the future, maybe, if I replay the Danganronpa games, which might happen, because I plan on getting them physically for PS4, and then that's probably where I'll get all the achievements and 100% them in. So, if I ever replay them then, and I'm still doing this series, which hopefully I am, then I'll probably talk about them then as a whole thing. But otherwise, no, probably not. It's just not going to be a thing I return to, unless it ends up being relevant for whatever reason. But, as for this episode, I don't really have very many themes for these episodes, aside from two of them. So for this one, I just try to loosely pull together a theme of games that are either games that I've played before, or are related to games that I've played before. And we're not doing series this time, it's all going to be like one-offs. So, the first one I want to talk about is Rayman Origins, which originally was a game that I played on the Wii way back when I was a Wii child, and I played it with my cousin. And it was awesome, because Rayman Origins is one of the best platformers I've ever played in my life. And I finally got it on PC, because I wanted to return to it, because despite the fact that I liked it a lot as a kid, and I played it a lot as a kid, I never actually beat it, because of two things really. The first being that I either didn't understand or didn't care about the Electoon limit that you needed for levels, and so I would just sort of go through them and complete them, and then move on to the next one. And then eventually, when the game says, hey, you don't have enough Electoons, I just didn't really want to go back to get the rest of them. Or, again, I didn't understand that I had to go back for the rest of them. I wasn't like a 5-year-old when I played Rayman Origins. I was probably like 10, 11, but I definitely wasn't paying that much attention to whatever games I was playing on Wii back then. And so, if the game stopped me at every point to be like, hey, you don't have enough Electoons, I probably just said, fuck it, I'm never gonna play the game again. Because I never got past that point as a kid, and I think I eventually sold Rayman Origins, which, you know, as a kid you sell a lot of games because you want to get new games, and you just don't really have the disposable income to build up a collection like you do when you're older. But, you know, every now and then, I still get mad at my younger self for having sold all those fucking games, because I had a lot of Wii games that I just got rid of because I wasn't playing them anymore, and obviously I couldn't have future-proofed them knowing that I was going to start building a physical collection, but still, fuck you, child Gavin. You ruined my life, and made me spend more money. But yeah, Rayman Origins. I picked it back up to play on PC, and, you know, this time I was intent on 100%ing it. I got all the Electoons, I got all the time trials for the levels. I haven't finished doing that, I should say, but I am in the process of doing that, and the reason I haven't finished yet, despite the fact that I've been playing Rayman Origins for, like, over a year now, is because I realized that the Steam version isn't really a Steam version of Rayman Origins, it's just a port from, I guess, consoles. And the distinction to be made there is that it's not a version of Rayman Origins that was made for Steam, that was made for PCs, that, you know, has achievements and cloud support and all that fun stuff. It's really just a port to PC. It's a version of the game that you can open on a PC and run on a PC, and that's it. No extra bells or whistles. And while it's still, you know, a fun experience to play for the most part, the controls and full screening fuck up a little bit sometimes, but otherwise it's a fine experience to play. The biggest problem with it is that because there's no achievements, once I 100% the game, there's kind of no proof that I ever did that. So I don't know if I want to 100% it on PC, which means that if I wanted to do that, I'd have to get a physical version of the game on either Xbox 360 or PS3, which I eventually plan on doing anyway, because I want to add it back to my physical collection, aside from just having it digitally on PC. So I guess I was gonna always come back to that, but it's halted my progress on the 100% on PC to know that I'm probably just gonna come back and do it all again on console. And so right now I'm not playing it because I'm considering whether or not I would even want to bother with the 100% now and then come back to it on console and then just do it all again, or if I want to just play the game normal style now and then do it 100% on console where it'll actually, matter. But otherwise, it's a fun game. It's, like I said, one of the best platformers I've ever played. It's fantastic, simple as. And I think the Electoon limit is a little bit lame, because the whole reason I ignored it as a kid was because I was used to platformers like Mario, where it's you beat the level and then you go to the next one. And, even as an older style person, I should stop saying style because it's a DSP reference and most people are just not going to get that. But, but as an older person, I still don't find it all that interesting because, for the most part, I just don't really want to do the 100% bullshit. Like, finding the secret parts of the levels where you get the other Electoon, that's fine to me. I'm fine with that. But doing the time trials, I feel like I would kind of just want to do that on my own if I wanted to go through levels faster. And there's another... Oh, and the Lum Electoons. Those I find completely stupid because it makes me play the level in this way that I really don't like, where I start nickel and diming every single Lum that I come across and not just getting immersed in the platformer experience of, because I feel like the best example of any good gameplay from a platformer comes from the flow state that a player gets into whenever they're just playing the game. It's part of why I think the Sonic series has the potential for the best platforming series, the potential to be the best platforming series of all time, despite the fact that it never quite reaches that height. Because in Sonic, the incentive, or the flow state for a Sonic game is going fast. Going fast and not being interrupted and then getting to the end of the level in a quick manner is the flow state for Sonic games. And it's also the way that you express skill in Sonic games. The faster you've been going, the better you are at the game. And so the best Sonic games are the ones that have that flow state that just does not get interrupted, and that's the intended way to play the game. Sonic Rush, for all of its level design faults and bosses that take too long, has a really good flow state because of the trick system and the way boosting works in that game. Rush Adventure is also the same, but with a more robust boost system, except for the fact that the game itself sucks because of the pirate shit, but that's a whole different thing. Trust me, we'll get to Sonic games. That's a whole episode. Spoilers. And Rayman Origins has a really good flow state, but the problem is that flow state is not cohesive with the part of the game that lets you play the rest of the game. And so, I don't know what the literal Lum limits, or sorry, not Lums, Electoon limit is in terms of how many you need to be able to beat the game normally, because I know there's the Red Tooth stuff that you get for the Underworld. But in terms of the normal game, I don't know exactly what the Electoon limit is and how many levels there are, so maybe it's possible that you can get every Electoon that you need just from getting the one for beating the level, and then the 2 extra ones that are hidden in the level, and you don't really need the Lum one. And even if you don't need the Lum one specifically, you can get at least one of them, because the limit for the first one's actually pretty low. It's usually pretty low, I should say. So I might be making a bit of a mountain out of a molehill here, but it's just a part of the game's design that bugs me a little bit, because otherwise, it would be basically perfect. I don't really know what I would even be able to complain about, aside from maybe that the flow state can be interrupted sometimes by the way the levels are designed, because Rayman Legends is way better at this because they give you all your moves from the start, and so it feels like the entire game was designed around that flow state, exemplified best by the music levels. But with Origins, it feels way more like most of the levels were just not designed for you to be able to have all of your moveset, and so they play more like a normal platform for the most part, and then there are a few areas where you can get into that flow state. Because even with the time trials, there are some levels where it doesn't feel like, ooh, I'm really close to beating the clock and all that fun stuff. It's more just like I'm playing the level normally, but trying not to make any mistakes. I think the Ice World has the best kind of flow state for the entire game, because a lot of those levels are designed around trying to not, slip inside all the place. But because of that slipping and sliding, you can just know where to jump ahead of time, and that will make your flow state for the level way better, because if you have quick reaction times, it doesn't matter what the ice physics are like. If anything, they might help you by letting you go faster. And all the mini sections where you slip inside into those little tubes that make you big or small. Those are also pretty good because there's no like transition or anything. You're not grabbing a mini mushroom in the new Super Mario Bros. Games. You're just going into the tubes and they launch you out. They give you more speed. Speed is fun to have in Rayman Origins. Surprise, I know, but that whole state of the game is when it's at its best, but it's not always at that state, if that makes any sense. But for as much praise as I want to give to Rayman Origins, the next game I have to talk about is one that actually depresses me just a little bit, because it's Valkyria Chronicles 4, and the reason that this is part of this episode's very loose theme is that I played Valkyria Chronicles 1 like years and years and years ago, because I had it on Switch, and I like Valkyria Chronicles a lot. It's got a lot of problems, chiefly that the levels themselves are just a little bit too long, and the gameplay itself is very, I don't want to say shallow, but it's not all that deep. And but otherwise, it was just a good game. I initially got it because I thought it was, I'd heard it was like Fire Emblem, but with guns, and I like Fire Emblem Awakening a lot. But then, actually playing Valkyria Chronicles, it's not exactly that. It has a lot of similarities to Fire Emblem, don't get me wrong, but but the greater gameplay of the game, the broad strokes, I should say, or those are different parts, because where Fire Emblem is a turn-based, it's a tactical turn-based RPG, Valkyria Chronicles is a tactical third-person shooter that also takes turns, and it wasn't really that bad, because like the way the game is framed is that you choose a unit and then you have to walk around the field and stuff like that, and choose who you want to shoot or throw grenades, things like that. And it's very much meant to feel like a real war, kind of, where you have to slowly inch your units up and up, and you only get a few of them, and you can only control a few of them in one of your turns. And you can choose to move one person multiple times, or just a bunch of different people, so that they all get to make the most of their movement capabilities. And different units are better at different things. So Lancers are good at taking on tanks. Not Berserkers, what are they called? Shock Troopers. Shock Troopers are good at taking out other infantry, because they have assault rifles and infinite ammo. Scouters are good for scouting, because you need to know where enemies are to be able to have them appear on the map and things like that. So they're good for just looking ahead, being able to see what the enemy is, and then running the hell back. And Engineers fix your tanks, and also are really good at healing units, because they have the best heals. They're basically the support unit, aside from just being called Engineers. They're essentially support. And like I said, for a lot of the faults of the game being that some missions are too long, and there are a few here and there that are a bit gimmicky, for the most part, I liked it. I gave it like a 7 out of 10, I believe, but I liked the game for the most part, because the 7 is very much memed on as like the mid score for when it comes to your reviewers, and that might be what it sounds like given how much I've not talked that great about the game. But I promise you, 7 is a good score, and I liked Valkyria Chronicles enough to give it a 7. And I was very ready to play Valkyria Chronicles 4 and have that be like the perfect version of the game, because in my mind, the way that I thought it was going to play out was, okay, the only reason Valkyria Chronicles 1 is like that is because it's an older game. Not old, mind you, I think it's from the PS3 era, but it's older, and so as the series goes on, it will adopt more and more modern sensibilities and understand more of what makes a game good, especially if it's in the same series and it knows what will make that specific game good. It doesn't happen all the time, mind you. The best Kingdom Hearts games were like the first 3. Or sorry, no, the best Kingdom Hearts games were 2 of the first 3, and then a bunch of bad ones for years and years and years until 3 came out. But it usually happens, and at least I was confident that was going to happen with Valkyria, because like I said, the base version of the game was good. It's just a lot of little problems here and there that drag it down. And so I played Valkyria Chronicles 4, and I was like, I'm ready. And at first, I was right. Valkyria Chronicles 4 starts out on a very good foot, because pretty much everything from the first game is the same. And, going back to look at the rest of the series, I learned that 2 and 3, because the reason I skipped 2 and 3 is because they're portable games, and I was not about to have another Peace Walker situation on my hands. And I looked at them, and it turns out that they change a lot of things in those games, I don't even think 3 was translated into English, but there's a lot of changes in those games that just aren't very fun. I think I might play 2 someday because I've heard interesting things about it, and it's the one that's actually in English. But 3, probably not. But before is very much a return to form for the series, where it's essentially just Valkyria Chronicles 1 again, exemplified by the fact that the story takes place at the exact same time 1 does. And so I played Valkyria Chronicles 4, and it starts off on a very good foot. And because everything's mostly the same, but they add a new unit, which are the Grenadiers, which are basically just mortars. And they're a really fun and unique unit. They're a little bit overpowered, because they can fire anywhere on the map and then just completely disable units. And as long as any of your other units has sight on an enemy unit, your mortars can just, like, fire on them whenever. Which, that applies in the opposite, too. This happens to the player as well, and it's really annoying. So, Grenadiers might be a little bit too good, but for the most part, they are a fun unit to play with. And initially, I was very much in the mood to start calling Valkyria Chronicles 4 the 8 or 9 to 1's 7. But then, I kept playing the game, and something made itself very apparent to me, which is that for everything that Valkyria Chronicles 4 does right, or even gets better than 1, it does 2 things that are worse than 1. The first and more important thing that I want to point out is that Valkyria Chronicles 4 is fucking addicted to reinforcements. Because this is a problem in the Fire Emblem series too, that sometimes enemy reinforcements will come along and just ruin whatever plan you had going on currently in the level. But the difference is that in Fire Emblem, whenever enemy reinforcements come, it's on the enemy's turn, so that they just come in and then go straight to your turn, and then now you get to figure out how to deal with the reinforcements. They might still fuck you over in whatever you had going on, but you still have some way to try and pull back and think of a new strategy. In Valkyria Chronicles 1, there were also reinforcements, but it happened infrequently, and whenever they did, the level would make a point of, stating that there would be reinforcements, that was going to be a problem for that level, or that you're going to be preparing for a longer engagement than typical. But in Valkyria Chronicles 4, I don't know if it was happening throughout the entire game, and I just didn't notice it until later, or if it just started happening more later in the game, but as the game went on, there were just more and more levels where enemies would not stop fucking spawning, and it was always near the end. Always when I'm like an hour into a level, and I'm like, oh my god, I just want to get this done. Oh, look at that, more reinforcements. Did you not save the game for the last hour? Well, I hope this doesn't fuck up anything you were planning to do, because you're going to be reloading that save, bitch. And it just happens over and over and over and over again, to the point where I started saving like a madman, just because I was always ready for reinforcements to come into a level, and then fuck up whatever plan I had going on, because in Valkyria, whenever you have a plan that gets fucked up, you can't exactly fix it in the same way that you can in Fire Emblem, because if reinforcements spawn on you in Valkyria, you have to spend a lot of time, a lot of wasted time, both movement and turn-wise, trying to get an enemy, or trying to get one of your units back into a safe position. Assuming, of course, that your plan wasn't just to run in guns blazing and try to take level quickly, because you can do that sometimes, especially in skirmishes, because skirmishes do not have reinforcements. And surprise, surprise, skirmishes are like the one levels in the game, or the one kind of level in the game that I consistently had top ranks on, and I never had to fuck up. Because skirmishes just don't bother with any of the stupid bullshit. You go in and you know what you're trying to do. But in the story levels, there's always something extra. It can't just be go in and do what you're supposed to do, or go in and there might be a slight twist on it. No, it's always go in and do what you're supposed to do, but whoops, someone else just showed up. Whoops, there's like 10 more enemy units. Whoops, the invincible tank that you have to fight throughout most of the game until the moment it becomes not invincible shows up, because story bullshit. It's just so tiresome. And it wouldn't be as big of a problem. It would still be a big problem, don't get me wrong, but it wouldn't be as big of a problem if it weren't for the other thing that Valkyria 4 does worse than 1, which are the hour-long engagements. And Valkyria 1 also had long engagements. I mentioned that earlier, that they very much want you to be inching your units forward like it's an actual war. So Valkyria 1 also had long engagements, but the difference is that Valkyria 1 had long engagements because the levels themselves were long, because there was a lot to do in them and there was a lot of ground to cover. And you didn't have things like Grenadiers, so you couldn't just fire enemy units from across the map and then make your way across that way. You very much would have to spend time using scouts to, look ahead the route. and figure out the best way for your units to move forward. But in 4, the reason engagements are so long are because on top of everything that I just mentioned that happened in 1, that also happens in 4, 4's animations are so fucking long. It feels like everything you do in the game has to be at least 5 times longer than it should be. You want to use one of the transportation things on a level, you gotta wait for a whole loading screen to pass by. You want to have a grenadier sit down to use a grenade, you have to watch them play out their entire sitting down and setting up animation. You want to move a tank to shoot one of the to shoot anything, you have to watch the tank slowly move the entire barrel to where it's trying to aim, load up, and then shoot wherever you're trying to shoot. Do you want to use one of your fucking orders? You have to choose the order, and then watch the entire animation play out. The thing of it spelling out the word order, because God forbid I didn't know how to spell the word order, and then the animation of your leader calling out, hey, use this order, and then the animation of a picture of your guy saying, use this order. It's maddening. Oh, sorry, and then the animation of the order itself actually taking effect, whether it be a stat boost or God knows what else. It's so much. Everything has to take so long, and that's the normal orders. Let's not even talk about the ship orders, which are that, but like 5 times longer, because everything must be 5 times longer. And it doesn't get any less egregious with the enemy units, because again, this happened in Valkyria Chronicles 1. Whenever enemy units would move, you would have to watch them move. It's not like Fire Emblem where you can have some setting be where you skip the enemy's turn, and just look at the results of whatever they did. Because in Valkyria, the minutia does sometimes matter, so I understand why they want you to watch every enemy's turn. However, this gets much more annoying in Valkyria Chronicles 4, because every animation that you do that takes forever is also an animation that the enemy does that takes forever. And so, you can understand where I'm going with this. And it gets even worse with bosses, because bosses also use orders, and bosses are in tanks that don't move linearly, so they have to do the most prolonged animations on the face of the fucking planet. And it really comes to a head in the final boss, because the final boss has an animation that is, I kid you not, 2 minutes long. And chances are, I've had that clip running in the background of this entire section, because this isn't hyperbole. I'm not saying it's like 2 minutes long. It is 2 minutes long. If I say like or about, I mean like, in, what's it called? Not an estimation. I'm rounding up, because it's like, if it's like 1 minute 56 seconds, that's still 2 minutes. Anything longer than 30 seconds would be unacceptable. Anything longer than 10 seconds is already egregious, but it's almost, if not longer, than 2 entire minutes. And it's not 2 minutes that you need to spend watching the game, because like I said earlier, things will happen on the enemy's turn that are important to the minutia. No, it's 2 minutes long to watch the enemy thing move. Just to watch it move from one spot on the map to the other spot of the map is 2 entire minutes. And the worst part, this happens every turn. This isn't 2 minutes every few turns. This isn't 2 minutes every 10 minutes. This is 2 minutes every time you finish whatever the fuck you're doing. 2 minutes from every single turn in that final boss. And because it's a final boss, it'll take you a while to finish that mission. Let's say, I don't know, 10 turns? And all of my math-inclined people in the audience might be seeing where the problem lies in having 20 minutes of the entire level be spent on doing nothing. And that's just a problem that persists throughout the entire game. And those are the 2 big problems that Valkyria Chronicles 4 faces. And one of the more minor ones is just that the story sucks, because Valkyria Chronicles 4 and 1 both have the same method of storytelling, where it's like this diary where you have to choose images that are basically just cutscenes, and then you click on every one of those individually to play a cutscene. And it got pretty annoying in the first game, where every time a cutscene would end, it would bring you back out to the diary so that you could click on the next cutscene, even if there was nothing in between those 2 cutscenes. I would rather they just play the cutscenes back to back, but it wasn't really that bad, because for the most part, Valkyria Chronicles 1 was paced pretty well, and the story itself was interesting. So even if it was annoying to have to press on every individual cutscene, I was still eager to want to click on the next cutscene, because I want to see what happens next. I'm interested, I'm curious. Valkyria Chronicles 4 did not have the same benefit, because since 4's story sucks dick and is paced awfully, Every time I got sent back to that diary, it was a time that I thought about just closing the game and being done for the day, because I just didn't care. I wanted to skip all of it, but I wanted to also be able to criticize the story. The only reason I can say that it sucks is because I watched all of it, but the intrusive thoughts, they kept coming to me, just telling me, skip all the bullshit and just play the game. But it's not like you're enjoying that part either, so just finish whatever you're trying to do and get out of here. But that's, again, it's a minor thing relative to everything else that we've talked about before, but it just doesn't help. It didn't make the experience of playing the game any better. And so in the end, Valkyria 1 ended up being a 7 out of 10, and everything that I hoped Valkyria Chronicles 4 wasn't. And I ended up on a 5. And it feels like a generous 5, but still. And I will say that the game's extra content does look pretty fun, because once you beat the game, you unlock a lot of extra stuff, whether they be skirmishes, little extra missions that have their own story, like one that ties back to Valkyria Chronicles 1, that's really fucking cool. But I just had no drive to play any of them, and I don't think I will for a long time. I do plan on playing them, because like I said, they do look very interesting, and the gameplay parts of Valkyria Chronicles 4 are still good. The parts that I don't like about the game are the reinforcements, which probably won't happen on any of the extra content, and the long animations, which are really just a time-wasting thing, but, you know, that just contributes to the game being awful to play. But the actual gameplay, the buttons you press, are fun, and there are interesting things to be done in that extra content that I want to eventually get to. But for now, the game just has too much of a sour taste in my mouth for me to want to do anything, even kind of like that. I have the game installed to my Steam Deck, but I probably won't get to it anytime soon, for what I feel at this point are obvious reasons. But, to bring us back to a positive upswing in terms of the games I'm talking about, I also played Icarus Uprising. And I'll admit that the game might have been a little bit hyped up for me over the years, because of people on Twitter.com being like, oh my god, this game's so funny, and Chugga Conroy's Let's Play being like, oh my god, this game's so funny and so awesome. But even beyond the hype, I still just found it to be a good game. Not a 10 out of 10 masterpiece, mind you, but it definitely could be. To get the best thing out of the way first, Uprising's rail shooter levels, or segments I should say, are the best parts of the game, by a very, very wide margin. And to the point where it's giving me a new interest in wanting to play rail shooters, and a few of the ones that I've played since then just have not scratched that same itch, because Kid Icarus's are just so good. I tried playing Panzer Dragoon, and granted I didn't play a whole lot of it, I played like the first 2 levels, but Panzer Dragoon was just slow, and I shouldn't say tedious, but they have a very low-key atmosphere to their levels, where what I was looking for was what I got with Kid Icarus Uprising, which are a lot of fast-paced moving parts, and epic vistas to look across while you're fighting enemies, which Kid Icarus Uprising did fantastically for a 3DS game, and that game looks really good in terms of art direction. In terms of the graphics, it's, you know, it's a 3DS game, but in terms of the art direction and the set pieces, fantastic visuals. I love that game so much. And like I said, yeah, the rail shooter segments, they gave me an interest in rail shooters because they're just that good. They have problems, mind you, but the problems really all come from the fact that it's on the 3DS, because the infamous part about Kid Icarus Uprising is the controls, for obvious reasons. And I'll admit that, yeah, everyone was pretty right about those. The controls do suck, and they negatively impact the rail shooter segments in that the way you dodge attacks in those segments are that you have to flick the stick back and forth to go into the direction that you want to go. Like for example, if you want to dodge to the left, you have to point your stick to the left, flick it to the right, and then flick it back to the left. And it felt very inconsistent, which that's the problem on the game that I'll give it, that I can't tell if it's supposed to be that you have to point left, flick right, and then flick back left if you want to dodge left, or sometimes if I just flicked right, it would just go right. I don't know. It felt very nitpicky and inconsistent, because it's a rail shooter. You're going to be moving back and forth all the time. And so sometimes there would be parts where I accidentally dodged because I was just moving the stick back and forth trying to avoid hits, and eventually I would need to dodge, and the game deciding whether or not I was already going right or left ended up determining which way I dodged, and it would sometimes fuck me over. So that part I'll say is the game's fault. But using the dodge itself, I don't think it's a terrible way to control it. I think it only feels so inconsistent because it's on the 3DS's circle pad, which isn't a control stick. But aiming was actually pretty good, because even though the stylus controls are weird, since it's a rail shooter segment, everything that you need to see will always be on screen, directly in front of you. And so if you need to aim somewhere in the game, Icarus Uprising has probably the best aiming controls I've ever had to deal with in any rail shooter ever, because everything's so precise. You aim exactly where you're pointing. Maybe there are some rail shooters on like PC that I haven't played that are comparable, because obviously mouse controls. Not that I think I would be that good at mouse controls compared to stylus, because I don't have quite the same dexterity. With a stylus, it's just, you know, hand-eye coordination. But with a mouse, I've talked about this before in my Rhythm Heaven videos, or at least in the other Backlog bunker that I did with Rhythm Heaven in it, but I just don't have that kind of coordination when it comes to a mouse. So I might not enjoy them as much, but that same precision is what I'm looking for in a rail shooter, and Icarus Uprising supplied that in droves. And Sin and Punishment I know is on the Wii, which might have the exact same solution. So whenever I get to that series, which I plan on doing semi-soon, you'll probably see it on this series. Whenever I get to that series, I'm very much excited to see what that has in store for me. But otherwise, in terms of the other rail shooters I've played since then, they haven't really scratched the same itch. Again, maybe there are some on PC that I don't know about, that I would hope people would recommend to me, but I digress. The parts that drag Icarus Uprising down are the parts that aren't the rail shooting, which is to say the ground segments. Now, they aren't completely awful. They are still fun. If anything, they have slightly better movement controls than the rail shooter segments. Or actually, no, I shouldn't say that, because the rail shooters are pretty linear. It's you move up, down, left, right, and then the dodging was the hard part. But the ground segments are a little bit more intuitive, because the way you dodge in the ground segments is you double tap the stick whenever you're about to get hit by an attack. So, like dashing in Smash Bros. Or in Kirby, because Sakurai just fucking loves the way he makes games, I guess. Yeah, you double tap to move in a direction, which in normal gameplay will make you run, but whenever you're about to get hit by an attack, it'll make you dodge that attack. And this, on paper, is actually pretty good, and it's intuitive. If you were to get out of the way of an attack, even without the dodge, what would you do? You would probably want to dash. So, having them be the same kind of control works out sometimes. The problem really comes in that the dodge is contextual, that you can only dodge when the game thinks you're trying to dodge, which is when an attack is coming for you, which makes it so that every dodge you do is insanely risky, and every dash you do might not be a dodge that you wanted to do. And even then, a risk-reward kind of dodge sounds good on paper. If you want invincibility frames, you have to work for it, and you have to risk yourself for it. But the problem is that on higher difficulties, you kinda need those invincibility frames, like, all the time, and so it gets harder and harder to justify the game giving you them when they think that you're trying to go for them, as opposed to just giving me them when I'm trying to dodge. So playing on higher difficulties ends up being really, really tedious, because the game, it's something that I might have mentioned when I talked about the Batman games, which I'm now realizing that I didn't, which is that in Arkham Knight, whenever I was doing, like, stealth missions, the stealth AR challenges, sometimes the game would get a little bit finicky, because a lot of actions in the Arkham series are contextual. You only grapple to where Batman thinks you're trying to grapple to. You only lock onto the enemy that Batman thinks you're trying to lock onto. You can only stealth grab the enemy that Batman thinks you're trying to stealth grab. And in the normal game, that works 99% of the time. I can't even think of an example that happened in the normal game for Arkham Knight, where it ever became a problem. The problem was in the AR challenges, where I was going for high scores and triple stars, and I needed the game to act perfectly, but it just doesn't. Because even though contextual actions worked 90% of the time, that 10%, every time they happened, they were frustrating, because, like I said, I needed the game to work perfectly, and it just wasn't. And Kid Icarus is very much that same way. The contextual actions work when you play on lower difficulties, like around 5 and lower, where you just don't really run into problems with them that often. When you start playing on 9.0s and you try to go for high scores, it becomes very, very apparent when the game is fucking you over, and you get basically two-shot because the game did not do exactly what you wanted it to do, because it's context-sensitive actions. Which kind of brings me to the other part of the game that's a little bit underwhelming, because this was also made apparent by playing the game on higher difficulties, which is that the whole weapon system kinda fucking sucks. And now I don't mean the different kinds of weapons. Those are actually pretty perfect. They give you a lot of different weapons for a lot of different kinds of playstyles. There are some that I think suck, obviously. I think that bows are fucking useless because they don't have the kind of fire rate to do any kind of good damage, and their homing capabilities are outclassed by palms. So why would you ever want to use a bow over a palm or a claw? Or really even a blade, honestly. And I think orbiters are just kind of lame, because they're basically just worse blades. But for the most part, every weapon has its niche, and there are a lot of different kinds of playstyles that will appeal to different kinds of players. And even, like, for myself, I very much prefer claws and arms, because I don't think that range matters all that much in Icarus Uprising, but their melee capabilities in terms of doing a shit ton of damage, and having very powerful shots, the claws in terms of their fire rate, and the arms in terms of just how much damage they do, are both really fucking good. So I very much prefer claws and arms, but I'll still use blades and stabs every so often, because stabs do a lot of fucking damage at range. Again, I don't think range really matters, but if I wanted to just spend the entire game sitting halfway across the stage from an enemy, pre-firing at them, that works too. I don't particularly love clubs, but their ability to reflect shots and just have really strong charge shots does make some levels really easy. So, again, I like the different playstyles. That's not the problem with the weapon system. The problem with the weapon system is the weapon rarity system, I should say, which is the way you get weapons that will do any kind of meaningful damage on higher difficulties is that they have to have high stars in terms of their both range and melee damage, and the stars that you get in a weapon are, for the most part, pretty random. They seem to be influenced at least somewhat by the stars of the weapons that you fuse to make them, but not in any reasonable standard, because even if you fuse two weapons that have like almost the max amount of stars, you might get a weapon that has less stars than both of them combined. So I don't particularly know how the system determines what stars you get. It might just be completely random within a certain margin of error, or a certain margin of difference from the weapons you use. Like, if you fuse two weapons that have the max amount of stars, you're probably not going to get a weapon with no stars, but you certainly aren't going to get a weapon that also has the max number of stars. So yeah, it might just be random within a certain margin, which is still annoying, because the way you get weapons to be able to do any kind of meaningful damage on the higher difficulties, because they also increase enemy health, which I don't like. It's one of those lazy ways of increasing difficulty where it's just, hey, more enemies, and they also have way more health, and they also do way more damage. That part I do not like. But the only way to even be able to combat their higher health pools is by simply having better weapons, which you can't always guarantee that you're going to have. And when you do have them, they might not be on the kinds of weapons that you want. Because even if it's a kind of weapon that you like for me, a claw, not every claw fires in the exact same way, or has the same kind of charge shot, or even same kind of dash shot. So things like that will vary from weapon to weapon, and if you don't get a good weapon with good stars, you're kind of just fucked until you happen to get one. And this isn't just a thing of like, oh, you want better weapons because you want to make the game easier on higher difficulties. No. I genuinely mean that you cannot compete on higher difficulties without better weapons, because there are enemies, both in the rail shooter segments and in the ground segments, where if you can't kill them fast enough, you are going to get hit. There simply is no way to be able to dodge damage consistently, because dodges can't be done back to back in both the flying and the ground segments. So if multiple enemies are in a room, if you cannot kill them fast enough, there will be times where multiple enemies will fire at you, and even if you dodge one shot, you won't be able to dodge the next one, and you will guaranteed get hit. It happens more so in the flying sections, because in the flying sections, enemies will go to like specific areas on the arena and fire at you. So there will be times there where it's like, hey, you gotta kill this guy now or else you're gonna get shot on. But in the ground segments, since enemies move around differently, and the player also has freedom of movement, it's not quite as guaranteed, but there are still battle arenas in the ground segments where they'll throw multiple enemies at you in intended patterns, and those are the scenarios where you're gonna get guaranteed hit. So times like those are where you need to have those stronger weapons, or else the game simply will not be very fun for you at all. And those are the kinds of things, pretty much everything that I've talked about with Uprising so far, are the kinds of things that I think would be very easily fixed in a remaster, or a sequel. And I know where we're at with Kid Icarus right now, as a series, which is that Sakurai has just straight up said, yeah, I'd like to make another one, but I don't have a team for it. And the way I see it, if Nintendo allowed him to go on his personal YouTube channel and say, yep, I would love to do more Kid Icarus Uprising, but I simply do not have anything for it right now. I've not been given the resources. If they allowed him to say that publicly, I think that we're not going to get Kid Icarus for a very, very long time. Because if Nintendo, again, allowed him to speak publicly on how little Kid Icarus Uprising is happening right now, that means there really isn't even one in development, right? Unless they just plan on making the next one without Sakurai, which is possible. He's not like the sole creative director on the game, but he's also the creative director on the game, and he's the one that got a lot of the things that make Uprising special in it. The weapon rarity might have been Sakurai, but it might have not been him. It might have just been 3DS shenanigans, because there's a lot of games that are otherwise perfectly fine games that have 3DS shenanigans in them. So that might not have been him. The controls, even without Sakurai, the controls can just be better. For all we know, one of the reasons the controls are so esoteric is because Sakurai came up with some unique way to control it on 3DS. But otherwise, they don't need him for that on console. It's more the story and the tone that the game would miss out on without Sakurai's unique brand of humor. But again, it's not impossible to make without him. I just don't know if one without him would be all that good. So here we are, I guess. I can stay hoping for more Kid Icarus, but the evidence shows that I might be waiting for the rest of my life, which I'm not happy about, but maybe I'll play Sin and Punishment and then be not happy about not getting one of those games ever again, because from what I hear, those are also fantastic rail shooters. Maybe the genre is just dead in the water. We're never going to get a good one ever again. Except for Galgun. Well, while I was thinking about Steam or PC rail shooters earlier, I remember Galgun, which isn't exactly the kind of rail shooter that I was talking about. That's more of like a Time Crisis rail shooter, but still, it's a rail shooter, and it might not be a very good rail shooter as a game, but like Honey Pop, well, no, not like Honey Pop. We'll talk about that eventually too, but unlike Honey Pop is a fantastic puzzle game that's also good for jerking your peanuts. But Galgun is, from what I can tell, not a very good rail shooter that is kind of good for jerking your peanuts. So maybe I'll play that one for that reason someday. And on the topic of series or genres, whatever, that are kind of dead in the water and might not ever be coming back, let's talk about Mario Party. Because I am very much in the minority when it comes to considering what Mario Party games are good. Because for the most part, when people talk about good Mario Party games, they talk about the first 7. Yeah, 7. And then the, technically, not new Mario Party games, but the kind of new Superstars and Jamboree. I guess we haven't played yet at the time of recording this. No one's played it. But I suspect that that game will also be praised pretty heavily. But it's really just Superstars, which is emulating the first 6, and, or so the first, well, really the first 5, but the first few Mario Party games, and then the first 7 Mario Party games. And I'm in the minority that says that those people are wrong, because even when you get, like, when you narrow it down a little bit more, people will exclude, like, Mario Party 1, and say, yeah, it's really just 2 to 7. Maybe they'll narrow it down even more, and say, no, 3 was the only good N64 one, and then the GameCube ones are good. Maybe they'll narrow it down even more, and say that it's just 3, skip 4, or no, it's 3 and 4, skip 5, and then 6 and 7 are good, and some people are fucking weirdos that include 8. But, again, I am in the, what appears to be, the vast minority that thinks the only good Mario Party games isn't even games plural. It's one of them. It's 6. As far as I'm concerned, 6 is the only good Mario Party game. And I think that I'm qualified to say this because I've played almost all of them. The only ones I haven't played are the 3DS ones and the Game Boy Advance one. I keep forgetting that there was 2 portable Mario Parties back when the series itself was considered good. But yeah, I played DS. I just haven't played the Advance ones and the 3DS ones. Which, granted, some might argue that the 3DS ones don't really count as Mario Party games anyway, because they're very much in the same vein as 9 and 10, where they tried to do something, let's say, different with Mario Party. So even if we don't include those games, I haven't played the 3DS ones anyway. So back to the normal Mario parties. Let's just go through all of them. This shouldn't take that long, but so first of all, the N64 Mario parties, they all suck. 3 is the one that I hear is like the only really good one, and I'll admit that 3 definitely has its positives in terms of the gameplay. The problem really comes down to the fact that 3 is slow as all hell. Everything takes so goddamn long in that game. The mini-games aren't really all that great, and the items aren't really all that interesting. I think where 3 shines is in the boards and in the 1v1 mode, because they're both very interesting, but a lot of the broader strokes of 3 are just not all that good, and I don't know what people are talking about when they say that they think that 3 is one of the best Mario parties. I don't understand it. So all the N64 games, they're already out. 4, the problem with 4 is that the items and the maps are bad, because the mini games, and which this applies to the GameCube Mario parties in general, all of the GameCube Mario parties have fantastic mini games. I don't even think 6 has all the best ones in terms of the GameCube Mario parties, but the rest of them are very much spread out amongst the other GameCube games. The problem is that it doesn't matter how good the mini games are, the boards need to be interesting that you do in between the mini games. Well, the way I see it, it's more like you do the mini games in between the board stuff, because the board stuff is like what most of the game is actually about. But still, if you're gonna go in between, back and forth between the minigames and the boards themselves also need to be interesting. If only the minigames were interesting, you wouldn't even play the boards, you would just go to the minigame mode and then play all of them. And 4's boards just aren't interesting. For the most part, they're just kind of squares. You go in a circle of a square, and sometimes there might be a shortcut along that square that takes you to the other side of the square quicker. That's pretty much most Mario Party 4 maps. Other than that, they don't do anything interesting. And in some of the worst scenarios, I forget which map exactly it is, but in the worst scenarios, there's a Mario Party 4 map where it's possible to get stuck in the same section of the map for the entire game, where you're just never allowed to progress. And if the star doesn't come along to be in your path whenever you're there, you're just not going to be capable of winning at all. So 4 just has some awful boards, and the items aren't very interesting, and the items are what spice up the board gameplay. So if the items suck and the boards suck, then everything that isn't the minigames sucks, and 4 sucks. And then there's 5, which I will admit, 5 is the bad Mario Party that I've played the least of. No, that's not true. The one I played the least of is 8, but 5 is a very close contender. And the reason I say this is because, having played 5, it might be the only other good one. Nowhere near as good as 6, mind you, but still, it might be the only other good one, and I just haven't really gotten to play it all that much. The thing that people I hear say that's the worst about 5 is that the boards suck, but I don't see it. They're not squares like 4, and they're not insanely slow and tedious like the first 2 games. And they're obviously not the same as what would come later in the series, let's say. Again, they're not as good as 6, but I don't really see what people are talking about when they say the boards for 5 suck. And the items themselves are interesting. Is it kind of weird that there's this whole system where you get the orbs for free, but then you have to pay to use the orbs? Yeah, kind of. But it's just the same way of doing the thing you were already doing, which is paying for orbs. Now you just pay for them when you use them. And the fact that you can use some orbs on yourself or on other people, it does spice things up. Sure, there are a lot of instances where you just wouldn't really want to use an orb on yourself for any reason, or want to use an orb on a different player for any other reason, but it does happen. There are scenarios where you would want to use an orb in a different context that it might have initially been intended for. So again, 5 does interesting things. Now the reason I say that I'm kind of here or there on whether or not 5 is the only other good one is because all these things that I'm talking about are kind of theoretical. I've only ever played one board on 5. Or sorry, I've only ever played one complete game on 5, and it was a game where we just weren't really in the position to be using orbs on each other all that often. So if there were scenarios that you would want to use orbs on other people more than you typically would, they just didn't really come up, and maybe I just need more extensive testing with 5 to be able to see whether or not what I'm talking about is really true. So as far as I'm concerned right now, 5 might be the only other bad one. Or sorry, 5 might be the only other good one, but it might just be another bad one. I'll need to play the game more. Which brings us to 6, kind of, in that it's a game that I've played far more so than any of the other ones, because it's the only one I actually like. And there's just too much to get into with why 6 is perfect. So what I'll instead do is talk about the few areas where it isn't perfect, which are a lot of the things that are solved with Dolphin's Gecko mods, because things like RNG minigames they're just not fun. I will say that I leave Pitfall on, because it's way more fun to have one RNG minigame that you might see at any point come up than it is to have a bunch of different RNG minigames that all try to trick you into thinking that there's some system to them. Pitfall is as straightforward as it gets. You pick a rope and you might win, and even if you don't win, it's still just a 50-50 between you and the other person for who's going to win. And so Pitfall is all that it is. It is the RNG minigame. If you see Pitfall, you know what you're in for, as opposed to the 2 other RNG minigames where they just might come up and it feels like a big waste of time, because why are you having me do all this extra bullshit to pick trees or whatever the RNG one is, when you already have an RNG minigame? If you wanted me to play an RNG minigame, why wouldn't it be that one, as opposed to all the other ones? You could argue that it's because it's one's 4v4 and one's a 4-for-all and one is a duel. But why couldn't you just make the free-for-all one the duel one, you know? So I just feel like there's no point in having there be both. And also, I feel like it's way more fun to have a duel hinge on an RNG coin flip than it is for a 4-player minigame to hinge on an RNG coin flip. So that's for that. There's a few other things, but I'm kind of blanking on all the other Gecko mods that are included in 6. But just go through those, and anything that looks like it would make the game better, or just does make the game better. Like, one of them is, I think, making all the bonus stars the same every time. That's one of the ones where it's like, yeah, that's one of the few failings of 6. It's not a huge failing, but it does detract from the game enough to the point where turning the mod on makes it better. So 6 isn't completely perfect, but it's so close that it can be fixed with just a few mods. It's very much like an XCOM, but not quite as egregious. XCOM is like a 6 out of 10 game that goes to an 8 out of 10 with mods. Okay, maybe not that harsh, but XCOM is definitely much more of a tedious process without mods on, whereas with 6, it's just a slightly better game. So there's that. And then 7 is weird, because on the surface level, 7 feels like it should just be 6 again. A lot of 7 just feels like the same things from 6, but slightly different. But then you get into the minutia, and you're like, oh, well, what's one of the things? Like duels. Duels in 7 are awful, because you play the duel first, and then afterwards you figure out what you're dueling for. And it's not even something you can choose, it's something that's RNG. And if you wanted me to do an RNG duel, why didn't you just have me do chance time, which is also still a thing? There are a couple of things that drag 7 down to just not being really any good. It's not awful. It's not awful like 4 is. The boards themselves are still fine. The items are still fine. The minigames are still good. It's a lot of broad things, like duels, for example, because duels make up a lot of what makes 6 really good. But that's just not at all present in 7. Oh yeah, and the boards. All of 6's boards are fucking fantastic, to the point where every time I boot the game up and I play with friends, I always have to ask, hey, what board do you guys want to play on? Because there's never any time where I'm like, let's just not play on this board, because they're all fantastic. But 7 does have a few bad ones, 2 of them specifically. Otherwise, 7's not horrible. I would play 7 if I was coerced into it by friends, but I'm never gonna boot that game up by my own volition. And then 8 is the one where I might be being unfair to it to call it another one of the bad ones, because like I said, I haven't played that much of it. The problem with 8 is that, unlike the GameCube games, 8 actually has some pretty bad minigames, and it's because of the motion controls, because 8 is on the Wii, and everything on the Wii had to have motion controls, and so there we are. And from what I've seen of 8's maps, they're also pretty linear and not all that fun. So, again, that's from what I've seen. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I need to play more of 8 and I'll see the majesty of it. But that's not going to happen anytime soon, because unlike with the other Mario parties where I can play them on Parsec with friends on my computer, I would have to play 8 in person, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to use motion controls. And luckily, the next Mario Parties are really easy to skip over because they aren't really Mario Party. 9, I don't think I really have to go into that. If you know anything about 9, you know why it's a bad Mario Party game. Mini games happen at random, everyone moves in the same fucking car. Mini games themselves feel like they don't matter because mini stars are basically just a toss-up until the very end of the game. Hell, even when you land on spaces feels like it's a little bit rigged, because I did a little bit of testing in Mario Party 9, and sometimes I'll reload a save and the exact same outcome would happen. And it very much feels like the game has some sort of algorithm that determines what makes for the most exciting game of Mario Party, because there were some times where it just felt like only specific things happened, where if I set all the CPUs to easy and I played the game out of my goddamn mind and I had way more mini stars than all the rest of them, it would seem to conveniently be the case that I'd land on a lot of things that would, you know, pull me down and bring the CPUs far closer to my star level, to the point where I won the game at the end, but it was by like a 3-star difference. And so it very much feels like the game is rigged in a few aspects. And that same thing applies to 10, but just higher definition. Because 10 is essentially just 9 again. The Bowser Party mode is interesting, but it also feels rigged in a lot of cases, because it feels like it's way too easy for Bowser to win. I've seen times where it didn't happen, but I've seen far more where it did. So something must be up. And then I think I'm not skipping any Mario Parties, which brings us up to Super Mario Party, the first Mario Party that was a return to form for Switch. Except it really wasn't, because stars didn't cost as much money, and every player got way more money from minigames, and the boards were all fucking tiny and basically squares, and the minigames, they're good, but like the GameCube Mario Parties, good minigames cannot save a bad everything else. What else? I already said the boards suck dick. All the extra modes, it's nice to have a bunch of extra modes in Mario Party, but aside from the rhythm one, they also suck. The solo mode sucks. The river party mode sucks and takes too long. Even if the idea of co-op minigames, where every player has to contribute, as opposed to versus minigames in the rest of the series, it's a very interesting idea, but like the board play for the normal game, the river play is what kind of drags down the river party for that mode. And I think I'm not forgetting any other ones. Oh, no, the team mode. The team mode is also very interesting, but again, it's interesting in concept when you actually play it, and it's very bare bones, to the point where you might as well just play a normal game of Mario Party. Which brings us all the way up to Jamboree, which has... Oh, sorry, no, Superstars. Superstars, it very much emulates the first 5 Mario Party games, but as I've already outlined here, I think those Mario Party games suck. So I don't think Superstars is very good either. And even if I considered those Mario Parties to be good, Superstars still wouldn't really do it for me, because it very much carries over problems from Super Mario Party, like the economy being fucked up, and random hidden blocks being more things to fuck up the economy. Because a huge part of Mario Party is that the only people who get coins from minigame are the people who won the minigame. If it's a team minigame, only the 2 people get the coins. If it's a free-for-all, only 1 person who gets first place, or if they tied and they get first place, they get the coins. But in Super Mario Party and Superstars, they fuck up the economy by trickling down coins, where first place gets 10, second place gets 3, I believe, and then third place gets 1. And while it doesn't sound like a lot, it very much adds up over time and makes it so that at the end of the game, everyone has way too much money, and no one ever has to consider what they're spending their coins on, because they always have enough of it. And then Jamboree, which hasn't come out yet, but there are a lot of things I've seen in the game that have made me realize it's probably not going to be very good either. And I plan on making a video about Mario Party that's just a huge long list of things that I want to be in a Mario Party to get a good one again. Which even includes taking things from the games that I think are bad, like Super Mario Party. I didn't even mention the special dice in Super Mario Party is a very interesting idea, and I like a lot of the special dice. I don't like that it makes a character tier list in Mario Party, but you can fix that easily by just making the special dice something you choose at the beginning of the game to assign to your character. It doesn't have to be character specific, and things like that. And even things I want to fix from 6. There are things that I want in a new Mario Party that would make it a good Mario Party. And I don't think I'll make that video soon, because it's not going to come out before Jamboree does, but I will almost certainly end up making it before the next Mario Party comes out, so hopefully it comes out and then Nintendo of America employees watch it and they go, I think we found out how to make a good Mario Party again. And yet again, on a bit of a sour note, I want to talk about Fire Emblem Fates, because I mentioned earlier that I played Fire Emblem Awakening, and that's one of my favorite games of all time. Probably my favorite game of all time, if I really had to narrow it down. And even though Fates very much tries to be Awakening 2, it really isn't. I'm not going to get into all the minutiae, like the fact that I think the ninja class sucks. There's just really two things I want to talk about with Fates, which are that the maps suck, and the story sucks. Now, the story sucking, I don't think is very controversial. I think the one thing that even people who haven't played Fates know about Fates is that the story sucks dick. So, I don't have to get into that either, especially since I didn't finish the game. Which brings me to the real problem with Fates, which is that the maps suck. And now I don't mean the composition of the maps, the very literal where are the tiles that you can step on parts of the maps. No, I mean like the things you do in a map. It kind of feels like I'm realizing now that Fates is the Valkyria Chronicles 4 to Fire Emblem Awakening, where it feels like there should be a lot of steps forward, but they mostly end up being steps back. And the maps, it's not really a reinforcement problem the same way 4 is. Not to say that there isn't a reinforcement problem. Fates also does have a lot of reinforcements. I just don't want to repeat the same things I said about Valkyria Chronicles 4, because it's the exact same thing. Everything I said about recruitments or reinforcements in 4 applies to reinforcements in Fates. So let's not deliberate on that. What I really mean when I say the maps suck is that the things that they have you do on the maps is always like the most time-wasting bullshit. I think the two examples that stand out the most in my mind are the one map, I forget on which route, where you're on the bridges that are mostly collapsed and you're trying to get to the end of the level to occupy a space, and the mission with the boats where the ocean's frozen over. Both of those missions end up sucking a whole lot because you end up wasting so much time inching your units across the bridges because there isn't that much space to be able to move them freely. You spend so much time inching your units from boat to boat because they can't just move from space to space. Getting off the boats has to be an entire action in and of itself, and you have to spam the hell out of your flying units as basically taxis to make that map go any kind of fast, and that's, keeping your flying units alive at the same time, which means you're going to spend a lot of time just doing shit over and over and over again on these maps, and it just gets so tiresome. Fates is very much the Valkyria 4 to Awakening, and it very much comes in just the maps and the story, which is the same thing I said about Valkyria 4. So I just kind of feel like I'm repeating myself, which I guess it makes things easier for me, since I don't have to spend that long talking about Fates. And yeah, I just didn't finish it. I just had no patience for the maps, and I was not having it. So I quit. I might come back to it someday, but probably no time soon. Same with Echoes, which I also won't be talking about because I didn't finish it. It's just not something I have the patience for right now. And I'm playing through Path of Radiance right now, and that'll probably end up being something I talk about in the series. But I want to play a good Fire Emblem, and it's not going to happen because Awakening is the best Fire Emblem, and every game I play after that is going to get compared to Awakening. I know that Three Houses is the one that everyone now considers to be the best one, but from the little bit of it that I've played, and the little bit of it that I've seen, I don't think I'll agree. But I suppose I have yet to play it, and I'll find out. But let's just say I don't have high hopes. Another short thing that I can talk about now is Pikmin 3, because that Pikmin 3, again, keeping with the theme of this episode, kind of, I originally played Pikmin 3 on the actual Wii U in like 2015. I got it rented off of GameFly, but I think I might have just been too stupid of a 10/11-year-old, and I didn't really understand the appeal or what I was supposed to do in the game, because I ended up quitting on I believe it was the snow level. Not like the tutorial where you're playing as Charlie. No, when you come back there as Alph and Brittany. I think I was in the middle of that, and I think I remember now, because the entire thing with that level at first is that Alph and Brittany are split up, and I think my small, feeble 11-year-old mind just could not grasp the the gimmick of that level and having to use both captains like separately for a while. So I just ended up quitting, which was the worst mistake I could have ever made, because in coming back to Pikmin 3 in the Switch version, it's one of the best games of all time. I don't know if I would call it one of my favorites of all time, because there's a lot of competition for that, but it's definitely a fantastic game. Oh, actually, no, I remember now. The reason I wouldn't consider it one of my favorites of all time is because for how good the game is, I wish it was longer. And I think that's the thing that everyone says about Pikmin 3, because obviously, and I know that length doesn't necessarily correlate to how good a game is. It's just a coincidence that all my favorite games happen to be pretty long. But it's more so that Pikmin 3 is so short that it doesn't get to make use of anything that makes it really fantastic. Like, the reason I consider Pikmin 3 to be a fantastic game is because I look at the design of the game, and I look at these things and I say, this is perfect, this is perfect. The day system is a perfect version of the same thing from 1, where you're still put pressure on with a limited number of days, but the number of days you have is dynamic with how good you are at the game. If you get more fruits, you have more days, and so if you play the game better to get fruits more efficiently, you'll be able to have more days to get more fruits. And it's just, it's perfect. It's perfect on paper, but the game itself is so short and so easy that it doesn't get to make use of any of those things that make it so perfect, to the point where playing the game normally, I had like 60 days when I got to the end of the game. I had 60 days worth of juice to use, because I just wasn't running out ever, and I kept getting more and more and more, because I would get multiple fruit per day, because the tactical strategy parts of Pikmin are fucking fantastic and they're really fun, but if you're good at them, you're never going to be challenged, you're never going to be timed. And then even when I played the game on extra spicy mode, I still had like 30 extra days, because, you know, even with half fruit, or half the juice you get from fruit, it's still Pikmin 3, and half of 60 is still 30, which is more than enough time to get whatever you need to do done. And so, yeah, for how technically perfect Pikmin 3 is, the actual game that you play is like 5 hours long, and it just doesn't really come together all that perfectly. I will say that it almost makes up for it with the extra missions, or the challenge missions, whatever they're called, where you have to collect stuff for the money, because those high scores are really what you're trying to get out of Pikmin 3 proper. And if there were more of them, / if they were harder, then I think that would bring the game up to being one of my favorites of all time, and probably a perfect 10 out of 10. To put it simply, if every one of the challenge missions was as hard as the Snow Lake challenge mission, then the game would be perfect. Because, my god, getting a platinum on that Snow Lake challenge mission is impossible single player. And trust me, I tried my hardest to get a platinum on that mission single player, and it just wasn't possible. Every millisecond that I wasted on having to switch between captains was a millisecond that kept me from being able to beat that mission, and it just wasn't happening. To the point where the only time I managed to beat it was when I was playing co-op with a friend of mine on Parsec, because it couldn't even be on my copy of the game. It was playing on her copy through Parsec on Yuzu. I mean, a very legal Nintendo Switch, but you know. But they were playing Pikmin 3 for the first time on Yuzu, and we just decided that for our first playthrough would be us doing co-op, and so we did the main story co-op, which resulted in a lot of funny clips. But then we started doing the challenge missions, and for every part of the game that she was messing up, for the rest of it, where it was really, the funny clips came from the fuck-ups, I will say. That's what I'll chalk it up to. But we went to that challenge mission, and we grinded the fuck out of it. I don't know for how long, but it definitely took us a couple of tries, to the point where we had a fucking rhythm down, and the chances are I'm showing the replay of that clip on the footage right now. It's probably not going to be the whole thing, or no, it can't be the whole thing, because we didn't record like us playing the mission, but I saved the clip of the replay of the mission that shows like where we went, and it was a buzzer beater. We had like 4 seconds left when we got that last treasure in, so even co-op, even co-op with 2 players who I would consider are very good at the game at this point, it was a buzzer beater. so that mission is impossible, and if every mission was close to being as hard as that, then it would be peak. but sadly, it is not. Another short game that isn't quite as good as Pikmin 3, but also requires some thinking, is Portal. Because I played Portal 2 years ago on the Xbox 360, and I loved it. I love Portal 2. It's a fantastic game, and a lot of the things that I hear about the first Portal is that it's better than Portal 2. I think that the criticism with 2 comes down mostly to that 2 was just way too long compared to 1, but I don't feel like that's a very substantive criticism, because if the puzzles are good, and the story, for what kind of little bit there is in Portal, is good, I like it to be longer. I want more Portal, so yeah, it's good that Portal 2 is longer than 1. I don't think that's a really fair criticism. Which, granted, like I said, that's just the one that I've heard. There might be more that I'm not aware of, but whatever they are, I probably still think they're wrong, because like I said, Portal 2, fantastic game, 10 out of 10. Weird that one also isn't one of my favorites of all time, but again, there's a lot of competition. And in playing Portal 1, unfortunately, I just don't think it was that good compared to Portal 2. And I'm not even just trying to compare it to Portal 2 to say like, oh yeah, Portal 2 is so much better because it does X, Y, and Z. Or that Portal 1 isn't as good because it doesn't do X, Y, and Z. It's more so that Portal 1 is short, and it's not really all that deep. Like, the reason Portal 2 being long is such a great thing, especially including the multiplayer, is that there are a lot of... It allows itself to flesh its puzzles out far more, to the point where there are a lot of puzzles, or times in the game, where I was stumped. Like, sitting there for 30 minutes, trying to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do with that puzzle. And I am ashamed to admit that... how old was I? I had the Xbox 360, so I must have been like 2016-ish. So I want to say I was like 12, 13. I was like 12, 13 playing those missions, and I'm a little bit ashamed to admit that I looked up a few of them. And we only looked up one for the multiplayer, because otherwise, me and my cousin were playing through those, and we were fucking amazing at it. But that one that we had to look up was with a thing that we didn't know could happen in the game, so I think that one's actually pretty fair. But in terms of the main story, I looked up like 2 or 3, I want to say. I think they were all in the Cave Johnson segment of the game, so it's a little bit disappointing from my position. I understand this, but I plan on replaying the game soon-ish, and that time I'm not looking anything up. Obviously, I don't remember most of the game, so I'm not going to rely on like, oh, I remember how this puzzle goes. It's not like a Wind Waker situation where I've played that game twice over, and so I can't really forget any of the puzzles in that game. It's I'll be playing Portal 2 after what, like 8 years. I don't think it'll be very fresh in my mind, so I think I'll have a fine gameplay experience replaying it, and I won't be looking anything up because we don't do that no more with puzzle games. I'm at the point in my life where if I play a puzzle game and I can't figure out a puzzle, and you know, I'm obviously just not gonna look it up, then I just stop playing the game. I try to come back to it whenever I can, like with Baba Is You. I definitely plan on going back to that game, but whenever I got something in that game, I just stopped playing because that game is so fantastic. Baba Is You, I'm not even gonna get into it now, but Baba Is You is such a good game that I would like it less for looking things up, even if it allowed me to progress. So that's just never happening. I would never devalue that game by looking anything up in it, and so it's on permanent hiatus for now. It's like Hunter x Hunter. I'll get back to it when my back is fixed. But yeah, Portal 1, it just doesn't really give itself a lot of time to get into its puzzles, which I guess I could have mentioned earlier, but yeah, that's the long and short of it, is that Portal 1 is so short that it doesn't give itself a lot of time to really get into the puzzles, because I felt like they were really easy in Portal 1, and then by the time that I felt the game was kind of starting to ramp up, it was over. So, unfortunately, Portal 1 just really wasn't as good as people said it was. I understand the deadpan humor is a huge part of the appeal, and I like deadpan humor. That's probably like my favorite kind of humor, but that doesn't really carry a puzzle game for me. I appreciate the game's tone for it, but where's the rest of my game? You know, it's like how a good story can't carry a bad RPG. But if I considered Portal 1 to be disappointing, that is nothing compared to what I thought about Halo 1. Because, for a little bit of backstory, I like Halo a lot. Specifically, I like Halos 3 and 4 a lot. 3, I think, is pretty uncontroversially one of the best in the series, if not the best in the series. And I played it as a kid with some friends. Or sorry, no. To be specific, as a very young kid, like 4 or 5 years old, I would play the multiplayer a lot with my cousins. And then as I got older, I had a friend whose house I would go over to all the time, and we'd play the multiplayer there too. But then, they eventually got me into playing the story of Halo 3, and I also loved that. And then when I would go back to playing it with my cousins, we just played more of the multiplayer, and because I appreciated Halo 3 more as an entire experience, we loved that as well, to the point where Halo 3 was one of my favorite games of all time for a long time, until it got its position taken from it by Titanfall 2, but in terms of like a first-person shooter that I like a lot. Again, there's a lot of competition, and minus a few games, Halo 3 is probably still up there. But in terms of being a first-person shooter, Titanfall 2 mogged it so hard that I still look back fondly on Halo 3. I still play it every now and then when I boot up the Master Chief Collection, but it's not the same love that I used to have for it. That might change if I play it more with like friends specifically, just some good old-fashioned 4-for-all on a good map, like the Desert one, probably my favorite one. But yeah, Halo 3, it's not quite the same as it used to be in my heart, but it's still a fantastic game. And 4, I know, is the more controversial one between those two, because 4 is where 343 started making Halo games, and they weren't really as good. And I'll admit that the campaign for Halo 4, people are right, it's not really that good. It kind of sucks even, some might say. But the multiplayer was where it was really at, and I spent a very, very long time on Halo 4's multiplayer. Because like I said with 3, for the longest time with 3, I only ever played it with my friends or my cousins, and I've only started playing it online recently through the Master Chief Collection, because I never owned the game myself until now. Well, Halo 4 was the first Halo game that I owned, and it was mine, and I played it online too much, quite frankly. And I spent a lot of time on custom maps specifically, but even the normal game modes were really fun. And I would spend hours and hours and hours a night, into the wee hours of the night, just playing like fucking Griffball, or a big empty arena where everyone has hammers and we just kill each other over and over again. No matter how bad Halo gets, there is never going to be magic to be lost with the Forge, because the Forge just allows everyone to make the best game modes and the ones that you'll play all the time, every time, for the rest of your life. And that's one thing I appreciate about Halo as a series, even with the bad games, is I like the community. The community is fantastic. We might not agree on a lot of things, and I still have yet to play Reach, but, you know, the community in terms of the multiplayer stuff will always have a very fond place in my heart. And I say all this realizing that I haven't really talked about Halo 1 at all, and I think that this is because where I mentioned everything that I loved about Halo from 3 and even 4, and even to an extent Infinite, that I played the online for only, because I don't want to play an open world Halo game. That sounds like ass to me. Like, you don't know how I feel about open world games in general, but just don't do that to Halo, or any first person shooter really. I don't want it, you know? But to get back to Halo 1, I keep distracting myself with anything that I'd rather talk about other than Halo 1, because again, this is another one that's controversial, but I just don't like Halo 1. I think it sucks even. I think it's like a 4 out of 10. And I played it on stream, so if you really want to get into the details of why I think that game sucks so much, you can go to my stream and see where I played most of the game, because I disliked Halo 1 so much that I eventually got bored of streaming it, and I just beat the game off stream, because playing it on stream wasn't very fun. And I found myself like trying to struggle to not fall asleep on my own streams, because Halo 1 is just too straightforward. And I understand the first game in the series syndrome, and I understand that it's very innovative technologically, because in terms of first-person shooter controls, Halo basically invented that. Because otherwise you had shit like GoldenEye, which controls like ass. But Halo was the first one to be like, hey, what if controlling a first-person shooter on a controller and not a keyboard and mouse was like fun? And I understand that aspect of Halo, and I can appreciate that aspect of Halo. But just because it was innovative technologically does not mean that it was fun gameplay-ally. Because Halo is just too straightforward. It is shooting guys in open arenas with the most boring guns you've ever seen in your entire life, over and over and over again, until you get to the end of the game and there's more shooting guys. And the maps just don't look all that good to me. And I'll admit that I played the remastered version of the Halo maps that everyone says look really bad, but like not graphically, art design wise, art direction wise, I thought they were fine. The problem that I have with the visuals of Halo 1 is that everything looks the same, which, granted, I didn't switch back to the original graphics all that often, so maybe on the original they did change up how rooms look a little bit more, but specifically in the flood section of the game, there was one section where I was just completely fucking lost, because there were two rooms that looked basically identical to each other, and I could not tell where the hell I was going. And I'll admit that it was a little bit my fault, but there was a small aspect of it that wasn't my fault. I don't remember the exact situation perfectly, because that part I did on stream, so if you want to check that out too, that one's available for the people to see. The only parts I didn't do off stream were like the very end of the game, so which I don't have any specific complaints about. So everything that you want to hear me complain about for real in Halo happened on stream, and you can see that. And yeah, it was just too straightforward, and I don't like it at all, and I think it's a bad game. Again, I appreciate the innovations it made, but the innovations do not a good game make. So, I'm very hesitant to get into Halo 2 next, if I wasn't. Because I played Halo 1, like, a year ago at this point, and if I had played Halo 2 and replayed Halo 3 in any, and played Reach and ODST in a reasonable fashion, Halo probably would have made it onto the first episode of this, where I talked about, all the series that I got into. But I'm holding back on playing Halo 2 because I don't want to be disappointed in the same way. Though I suppose you could argue that I won't be disappointed because my expectations have been completely reset by Halo 1, and now I know that every game before 3 might have just sucked. So maybe my expectations are properly aligned now. Still not going to make me any less wary to play Halo 2, because it wasn't just an expectation thing, I also just didn't like playing Halo 1, and so even if my expectations for Halo 2 are that it sucks, if it sucks, I'm still not going to like playing it. But I'll get to it eventually, but eventually does not mean anytime soon. Which concludes all of our individual game topics for this episode of the Backlog Bunker. And now, in terms of the gaming topic that I want to talk about in general, it kind of refers to game delays in general. And there's two specific instances that I want to talk about in terms of game delays, but to cover the whole thing, how I feel about delays generally, I don't like the age that we live in now, where games will get announced years plural, ahead of when they're supposed to release. I don't particularly care about The Elder Scrolls 6. I think Skyrim is a bad game, so I don't give a shit about whenever Elder Scrolls 6 comes out, because I'm not going to buy it anyway. But I think it's really fucked up how they announced that game in, 2018? And we just know nothing about it. It's been 6 entire fucking years, and that game is just radio silent. And I know this isn't a thing with delays specifically. They might have just announced that they started working on Elder Scrolls 6 without it being delayed necessarily. Not that I think it won't be delayed, but yeah, it's a whole different thing. That's what we're going to talk about in a second. But it's more so that, I guess this is a double topic of delays and game announcements, where I don't like that a game can be announced so far ahead of time. Even with games that, again, I don't think will be delayed, Insomniac's Wolverine game. Why do we know anything about that game when it won't be coming out until 2027? Why do we even know it's in development? What happened to moderation? What happened to the age of gaming where a game could be announced, and when it was announced, that's because it was going to come out soon, to the point where you could get hyped for a game because in 6 or so months you would know what you were looking forward to. Whereas with Wolverine or Elder Scrolls 6 or God knows what other games, it's these games are 6, 7, 8 years off from being released. The hype is gonna die. In cases where it doesn't die, like a Cyberpunk or even a Kingdom Hearts 3, that's a bad thing. These games take so long to come out from announcement to release that the people who were waiting this entire time are finally, all my waiting was worth it. And then it ends up not being worth it because no 8-year wait for a game is ever worth it. And then for normal people like me who, have reasonable expectations for things, the wait just lets the hype die. Because when a game comes out in 6 months, Mario and Luigi Brotherhood comes out from the time of recording this in 2 months. And I think about that game almost every day. It might be a little bit of an over-exaggeration. It might be... Okay, no. It's more accurate to say that I think about that game at least 2 or 3 times every week. For every week that passes before that game comes out, I've thought about it at least 3 times, because I'm so excited for it, and it comes out so soon. I know what I'm waiting for, and I know what I'm looking for in the thing that I'm waiting for that will come out in 2 months. It's not the same as a Kingdom Hearts 4, which is a game I forgot to even fucking list on my document here for things to talk about. It's not even like a Kingdom Hearts 4, where that game's been announced in 2021, and to the point where I've caught up to the entire series and become a Kingdom Hearts fan, and I'm still waiting for anything to be released about that game. What do we know about it so far? It's gonna take place in fiction, in unreality, whatever the fuck they were talking about in what's it called? The music game? that's extremely important to the series for some fucking reason. It's like, we know nothing about that game, and it comes out who knows when. The mobile game comes out this year, probably I think. I'm not even completely sure. I don't want to rehash the things I talked about in the Kingdom Hearts episode, but I'm tired of waiting. Why? And okay, I'll admit, the Kingdom Hearts 4 is a bit of a different situation because it's a continuous series, so obviously we know that the game was going to come out. We know there's going to be a next Kingdom Hearts game at some point, so it was always going to be a long wait. My problem is with showing us, hey, we're working on Kingdom Hearts 4, and we've gotten a decent way into development of the game because we're able to show you this gameplay footage, but it's not going to come for the next few years, plural. And I just don't understand why you would show it off if it wasn't going to come anytime soon. And the biggest reason this becomes such a negative is because whenever they show these games off super early, it always ends up not being reflective of the final product at all. Okay, no, I shouldn't say at all, but it's to the point where the initial gameplay reveal is essentially a tech demo for what the game actually might play like. So at this point, we know nothing about Kingdom Hearts 4 aside from what the story might kind of be about. Which brings me back to the delay thing, where people will show off these versions of games that aren't reflective of the final version because the final version isn't done. And something I learned when I read Jason Schreier's book, Blood, Sweat, and Pixels, which fantastic book just in general. It's a good read, but also specifically if you want to get into the game development sphere, which, you know, I want to, it is a very illuminating book for how game development works. And something I didn't know before I read that book was that when demos of games are created, they're kind of like their own build of the game. They can't just take a snippet of the game, they can't just take a part of the code and slap it into its own exe file and run that at like E3 to show how the game's gonna play or whatever. No, they have to specifically make a different build of the game that will do different things because it's only the scope of a demo. And typically, that means that when you see a demo of a game at like E3, well, I guess E3 not anymore, but when you see a demo at a game at some kind of conference, it's a version of the game that might be reflective of the final version, but just because they have this demo doesn't even mean that this section of the game is done, because that demo might be railroaded. That demo might have cut off a lot of features or things you can do in the game just to stop it from breaking, because that build of the game that's specifically made for the demo is basically put together with glue and duct tape. So when I see things like Kingdom Hearts 4's gameplay reveal in 2021, even if the game came out a year later, it still might not be reflective of how the actual game's supposed to be, because the version of the game that we're seeing for this little showcase might just be completely railroaded. Because, remember, that's for, like, demos. They can railroad demos for people to play just to get their hands on the game, just to get a scope of what the game might feel like. But with Kingdom Hearts, the 4 presentation, that was entirely a video. For all we know, 90% of what we saw in that quote-unquote gameplay reveal might have just been a cutscene, because they very much look like things you might be able to do in an enhanced version of Kingdom Hearts 3's set-piece moments, but they also might not be, because a lot of what you see in that section of the game feels like something you would do in a cutscene. It's like a QuickTime event. Like the drill coming up. Is that something that you could actually do, or is that a reaction command that are allegedly coming back for this game? Because if it's a reaction command, then why didn't a reaction command come up? The sliding through the building section, using the Keyblade chain as a whip, or a grappling hook, which I hope that becomes a gameplay thing. It won't. It won't be a gameplay thing. It'll be, at best, a traversal mechanic. But, anyway, things like that, those might have all just been railroaded specifically along that path for the demo. There might not be anyone even playing the game. It might have just been the code being run to make Sora do X, Y, and Z to let the entire demo play out in this specific way, to the point where I don't even know if it's possible for that build of the game to break, because it might not be a build of the game. I say all this to say that I'm growing increasingly pessimistic with the state of any game as soon as it's released, to the point where whenever a game that I'm actually interested in gets announced or anything like that, I don't even bother setting an announcement on my calendar for it anymore, because I used to do that all the time with games that I wanted to buy. I would just set the date on my calendar and say, hey, this game came out this day. So even if I wouldn't buy it day one, I would still just be aware, oh yeah, this game is out and I am available to buy it now. I just don't even bother with that anymore, because we're at the point where maybe it won't come out on that day. Why even bother setting the release date when that could change anytime, really? Which brings me to the specific instances of games where they've been delayed up till recently. And the most prominent one, I think, to my life specifically, is, well, it's not one game, it's one company that makes games, which is Level 5. And Level 5, as far as I'm concerned, make a lot of really solid games. Not a lot of my favorite games. I like Inazuma 11 as a franchise, I like the anime a lot, but the games themselves on DS are not fantastic. And while Fantasy Life itself is a not fantastic game, it's definitely one of my favorites of all time. Because, you know, if you're a real gamer, one of your favorite games of all time must be a mid-as-hell game that no one's ever heard about from like years and years and years ago. Otherwise, you're just not a real gamer. Sorry to say, I don't make the rules. But Level 5 just does a lot of RPG stuff in general it's solid. Even the Layton games, which I haven't played but I've heard a lot of praise of, everything that Level 5 makes is very solid. They might not be the best games of their genres, or for specific people maybe, but they are very solid games that are technically sound, and everything they're going for pretty much works. But Level 5, if you aren't aware, has fallen on some hard times recently, where they've faced almost being out of money for just anything, which brings me to the games that have been delayed from them, because for a little bit there was concern that Level 5 might just be closing down for good, but then they brought it back, and they at Nintendo Direct they were like, hey, we're making the next Layton game, and it's gonna be steampunk themed, which everyone fucking coomed over. Not me, because I haven't played Layton games, but I mean, good for them. Good for Layton fans. Your series is back, and it's gonna be on Switch instead of on the shitty ass 3DS. Not to say that the 3DS was shitty. I love that console with all my heart. It's probably my favorite console of all time. But, capital B, but, there were a lot of series that were dragged down by being on that console. Layton and Ace Attorney and Kingdom Hearts are among the examples of that. And so yeah, I cheer for Layton fans when they get the game that they were looking for. What I was far more excited by was the announcement of Fantasy Life 2. Or is it Fantasy Life I? I forget, because there's a mobile game for Fantasy Life that might be the officially titled Fantasy Life 2, but it's only in Japan, and it's also a mobile game, so it's worthless to me. But whichever one it was, Fantasy Life for Switch was the top one of my big three in terms of a wish list for games that I want to exist. The other two were for a Mario and Luigi game to return, which you know now has been fulfilled, and the other one is Icarus Uprising to either get a re-release on like actual consoles with real controls, or a sequel on actual consoles with real controls. And the top one of that top three was Fantasy Life, because like I said, Fantasy Life is one of my favorite games of all time. It's in my top 10, even though the game itself kind of sucks and no one knows what it is. So for the longest time, I always just assumed we were never going to get another Fantasy Life, because, I mean, why would we? It's not like the game had like a prolonged story that would be followed up in a sequel, or if it was so popular that there was just so many things they need to do in a sequel of the game. I just figured it wasn't going to be a thing, because, you know, one-off games happen. There are a lot of AA entries in the video game sphere that are just one-offs. They might be your favorite game of all time, but chances are there's just not going to be another one, because there's not really much reason to. They did everything they wanted to with that first game, and it might not have sold that well, so multiple reasons not to make another one. And so I always figured we weren't going to get another Fantasy Life, even if I wanted one really, really badly. And then they announced that Fantasy Life game, and I was ecstatic, elated even. That Fantasy Life, the one game that I thought no one but me on this entire earth gave a shit about, was finally going to return, and on a real console. It's not on the shitty 3DS. But then it got delayed, because it was supposed to come out in 2023, but it got delayed to not meaning that, and they said, no, now it's 2024, and I said, oh, okay, 2024, that's fine, and it's now September of 2024, and the initial release date for for Fantasy Life I was supposed to be next month, And we don't know anything about that game because it's not coming out next month. It's actually coming out in 2025. That's not going to be 2024. And so that game is in development hell, I assume, which disappoints me and saddens me because there's no way that game will be far enough in development to get canceled. There's no way the game is at the point in development where it's able to get canceled, right? Because in terms of Level 5's priorities, Layton's gonna come out soon. That's a way more popular series than Fantasy Life. Inazuma 11, which has also been delayed, is also a more popular series, which has also been, which is gonna get more priority than Fantasy Life. And so if Level 5 is really struggling for money, and they just have to say fuck it to one of the things they're developing, I think it might be Fantasy Life, and I don't know if that game will ever come out. I hope it will. I will cry if it doesn't, but it's not looking good. It's not looking good for us, guys. And Inazuma 11 is another one that I'm excited for, because like I said, the DS games I don't think are all that good. That's mostly because of, like, controls and the fact that they're RPGs, which means you have to grind, but I don't like grinding in action games, because for all intents and purposes, Inazuma 11 is an action game. It's not like a turn-based RPG, or an action RPG. It's a game where you use your skills to be able to play the game, but if your skills aren't met up to by your stats, you're just not going to be able to do anything in the game, and I wasn't a fan of that, so I stopped playing the DS ones. But I played the demo, or the trial, for Victory Road, which is out on PC and console right now, and I fucking love it! It's everything I wanted from Inazuma 11. For one, it's like an actual sports game now. It's not like, you use a control screen to, like, command your players to go certain places or do certain things. No, it's like an actual soccer game, where you control the player, like, with the control stick, and you can pass between your players, and, like, a soccer game. You played a soccer game before. It's like that. It's a real game now. And that was already like, oh, it's everything I wanted. But Inazuma 11 Strikers for the Wii was also a real soccer game, but it just kind of wasn't all that good because all the mechanics like stealing the ball and using Hisatsu moves were kind of underwhelming in Strikers, but they even fixed all of that bullshit in Victory Road 2, because being able to pass through people, or stop people from being able to pass through you, and passing the ball to score goals, and even just scoring goals normally without using Hisatsus, but also using Hisatsus, it's all so good, and they perfected it, and it's oh my god. I don't want to call a demo one of my favorite games of all time, but it's getting there. It's close. I'll say that much. And I love Victory Road so much, but that game has also been delayed indefinitely. And that's another one where if it doesn't come out, I'm gonna cry. It's, oh my god. It's to the point where I want to go back and finish the Inazuma 11 anime, because I watched the original anime and I watched some of Go before I quit because Go kind of sucks. But I want to go back and watch Ares, the newest series, and I want to go back and watch that because that's what Victory Road's based on. But Victory Road's been delayed for like 5 years at this point, because it was supposed to come out and coincide with that anime, with Ares, because the Go games have already come out, the original games have already come out. Ares was supposed to have Victory Road, but it's not here yet, and so it's just been delayed over and over and over and over again. And if the game doesn't come out, I'm gonna cry. I'm gonna be really sad. That's the long and short of it. And so Level 5 is doing really bad right now, and it's the state of the gaming industry where multiple games can be delayed from an entire company, and we just don't know anything about them, to the point where, why were they announced in the first place? Did something happen? Did Level 5's office burn down and stop development for a while? What could have happened that they were able to announce these games and show off gameplay and create demo versions, which I've already explained is so hard to do, for Inazuma 11 or Layton, or even show off gameplay for Face Life Switch? They could do all of these things, but they couldn't finish the games on time. And not even to the point where it's delayed, like, oh, it's delayed by a month, it's delayed by 3 months, it's delayed by any amount of time. No, they're just delayed indefinitely. We don't know when they're going to be finished, when they're going to be stop being delayed. It's a whole situation that I'm not a fan of when it comes to the current gaming industry. Which brings me to the other specific instance of a game delay that has gotten to me personally, which is Dragon Quest XII. And I don't know how much is going on behind the scenes of Dragon Quest XII, because unlike with Level 5 games, we haven't seen any gameplay about Dragon Quest XII. It's just a game. It's like Elder Scrolls 6. We know we have a logo for the game, and that's it. That's all we know about the game. And I understand the development issues with 12, with things like the producer, I think, left at some point, and so they had to struggle with that for a while. And now Toriyama is dead, so if he hadn't finished working on, like, the art for the whole game, then that's something else that they have to finish in his absence, which is unfortunate because Toriyama's art style kind of made that series. Dragon Quest is nothing without Toriyama's art style. Okay, no, I shouldn't say nothing, because I think the tone of the series is still iconic to it, but the art style is also iconic to it. Dragon Quest is the silly, goofy, more upbeat RPG to Final Fantasy in terms of Square Enix's RPG lineup, and without Toriyama's art, a lot of that tone is gonna have to be carried by the writing, which, to be fair, it was in Dragon Quest XI. I like Dragon Quest XI a lot. It's my top 3 games of all time, and because of the writing. But you can't do writing like that with like Final Fantasy XVI's graphics. So if they need to finish more art in that series, it's very much a toss-up of what they're gonna do. I really hope they don't get what's his face is working on Dragon Ball Super to do the art for Dragon Quest, because my god, he's not a good artist. I don't like him. Toyotaro, that's his name. I don't want Toyotaro working on Dragon Quest, because no, I shouldn't say he's not a good artist. That's very presumptuous of me, not being an artist myself. But I don't like his art, and it very much feels like a discount version of whatever Toriyama tried to draw, and so I just don't think his art will be very good for Dragon Quest. But I mean, here's hoping that whatever comes out for that series is going to be good. Not that we know what's going to come out anyway, because that game is also delayed indefinitely. Not that it ever had a release date. The only thing we ever had from that series was, oh, Dragon Quest XII is a thing that's going to come out. But at this point, it's been years since that announcement. What was that, like 2019? 2020? It's been 4 years, and we still know basically nothing about that game. Aside from that, it's allegedly going to have a bit of a darker tone from other Dragon Quest games, which, please don't. That's not what the series is about. We're seconds away from the next Dragon Quest game being an action RPG, like the Final Fantasy games have become. And if that happens, then I'm just going to be disappointed. Not because I don't like action RPGs, I like Kingdom Hearts, obviously, and I haven't played the Final Fantasy action RPGs, so maybe those are also good. But I just don't want Dragon Quest to become that, because that's not what Dragon Quest is. Final Fantasy is supposed to be the series that keeps innovating and changing in Square Enix's lineup. The Dragon Quest is the comfort food. That's the one that doesn't change. It's always going to be classic, good old-fashioned, turn-based RPG combat. That's what you come to Dragon Quest for. And if they change that, or the tone, and they just make it Final Fantasy again, as a series, it's not going to be very good. At least I don't think so. But all I can do at this point is speculate anyway, because who knows when the game's coming out. But hopefully it's nearing completion at this point, because another Dragon Quest that was going to be talked about on this episode of the Backlog Bunker before it eventually got a release date was the Dragon Quest III HD 2D remake, because that got announced at the exact same time as Dragon Quest XII did, and until this year, that one was also in development hell, or purgatory, whatever you want to call it, because we just had no idea what the deal was with that game. We were just waiting for forever for what was essentially a remake. Not even essentially, for what was a remake. And obviously remakes aren't easy to make, but the whole point of the HD 2D style was that they can basically just copy assets from Octopath and everything else they made. Triangle Strategy, which, awful name, but yeah, they can copy assets from, and the engine from those games, and just make Dragon Quest III in it, so it shouldn't have taken that long, especially from announcement to release. But whatever, at this point, we know that we're getting Dragon Quest III, and they did the first 2 games too, which is what I wanted. I thought it was weird that they started with 3. Well, I guess not that weird, because it is the most popular of the classic Dragon Quest games, but I thought it was weird for people to be able to get into the series because, well, where's 1 and 2? And 4, and 5, and 6, and 7, and 8, and 9, and 10, still not in America. 11 is the only Dragon Quest game at this point that's, like, really available to buy, because Dragon Quest is not as favored as Final Fantasy is in Square Enix's lineup, so while Square Enix gets 50 billion re-releases for every single game in that series under the fucking sun, Dragon Quest just gets to sit in the corner and have Dragon Quest XI be sold. That's it. And then 1, 2, and 3, like emulations of those on Switch, but the rest of the series, if you want to play them, you better get a PC and emulate them, because they're just not being sold anywhere. And so if they wanted to get people into the Dragon Quest series, why aren't we getting pixel remasters for those games? Why does Final Fantasy get that, but Dragon Quest doesn't? Even though Dragon Quest was the first one, I think it's unfair to Dragon Quest for that series to have no re-releases on any modern consoles, but then Final Fantasy gets everything that it's gotten on PC and other consoles. But they're working towards that because initially it was just going to be the 3 HD2 remake, but now we're getting 1 and 2 as well. I think it'll cost a little bit too much because all 3 of them I think are going to be $60 releases, but I still am appreciative that they exist. I won't be buying them for $60 if you catch my drift, but I want them to exist, is the point. And I want them to at least re-release the old Dragon Quest games. They don't all have to be HD2D remakes, but like, give people a way to play 4 through 9. Bring 10 to America, unless you don't care anymore. But just do something with Dragon Quest. If 12 isn't going to come out, re-release the old games. Do something with the time you're just wasting at this point, not doing anything with the series. I know Monsters just got a re-release on, what was it, Switch or PC? I think it was PC, but Monsters is a side series. I know that the Treasures game was also re-released. Not re-released, it was released. But Treasures is also a side series, and Dragon Quest has a lot of side series, but you can't just fill my gullet with side series when Dragon Quest XI came out in 2017. I know that 11S came out in 2019, but that was still 5 years ago. So you just, please, do a little bit more with Dragon Quest. I know it's not hugely popular in America, but just give me something, man. Because I like Dragon Quest a lot. And it just feels like it's being shafted in favor of the far more popular series. And I know that's just how business works. But I feel a little bit of loathing for Final Fantasy, given that I've played a few of those games by now, and I think that a lot of them suck dick, but Final Fantasy mysteriously has managed to rise above all of that and be one of the most popular franchises on Earth and get 50 billion things from every single direction of every single multimedia thing you could possibly do with that series, to the point where AAA releases are coming out in the same year, because Rebirth and... 16 didn't come out in the same year as Rebirth, but 16 came out a year before Rebirth, and it feels unbalanced, and that's what I want, is balance. And I know that I'm biased because I like Dragon Quest and not Final Fantasy. If it was the other way around, I probably wouldn't feel this way about Dragon Quest, but, I mean, that's why this series is about me, isn't it? And it's not about Final Fantasy fans, because if it were, then they wouldn't be on my channel. That's not true. I could invite a Final Fantasy fan whenever I want, but I'm not going to do that, because, well, I just don't have any lined up for now. That's not what I plan to do with this series, but maybe in the future, this will become like a pseudo-podcast, and I just invite people on to be like, hey, talk about Final Fantasy, why you're wrong. Stuff like that. Which brings us to the end of this episode. Thanks everyone for joining me for another episode of the Backlog Bunker. Hopefully I try to get these out faster than I did before. I know the last episode came out on a Sunday rather than a Saturday. Hopefully I get to remain consistent with that, but we'll see how things go from this point. But yeah, thanks for watching. Get out of here.